Good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're at. Good evening for some of you. Welcome to Arbinger's series here on conflict resolution that works. My name is Chip Huth. I will represent the Arbinger Institute. I serve here as a senior consultant. So I'm going to jump right in with respect to your time. A little bit of background on me. I served 30 years as a police officer in Kansas City, Missouri. My expertise was building and leading SWAT teams. I had the privilege to lead the most active SWAT team in the nation for over a decade. And it was during that time of working with that team, I first became acquainted with Arbinger's material. And it, not to be too dramatic, was completely transformative, not just professionally, but also personally. And ever since then, I've been all in, so to speak, and just doing the best that I can to learn as much as I can about the ways in which I don't see my contributions to the problems that I contend with. So that team, that SWAT team that I mentioned, I was actually brought into that team at the time because that team was struggling. They were the most complained on team in the entire organization. They had a multitude of lawsuits. It was costing the department in the millions of dollars a year to deal with these complaints, these lawsuits, and all of these things. So I was actually brought in by a deputy chief to turn that team around. The team was wrought with conflict, not just internally, but also conflict within the community and our other partner agencies. So I was brought in there to resolve that as the team lead. And I'll share my experience, so to speak, as we unpack this material. So imagine me going into that team. There's two ways primarily that I could show up. And one way is what we call in Arbinger speak an inward mindset. So what do we mean by inward when we're talking about our mindset, our perspective, our attitude? When I'm inward, I fundamentally ignore the truth about other people. I essentially see other people as not mattering like I matter. They don't count like I count at a fundamental level. People will push back on this idea. They'll say, well, Chip, look, there are many differences that people have, a whole spectrum of differences, as a matter of fact, and you can rank order people in terms of intelligence and morality and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't disagree with that. At the level of behavior, of observable qualities, we sure do differ quite a bit. But at a fundamental level, we're actually the same. And that core truth represents the key to effectively managing and avoiding conflict, unhealthy conflict. And what is that? How do we represent that, though, without being too philosophical? Well, if we were all in a room together today, and I were to ask each of you, raise your hand if you have something in your life that matters deeply to you. How many hands go up? Some of you are actually raising your hand right now. Thank you, by the way. There's no doubt that's happening. It's every hand. Every single one of us together today, and every single person you passed on the way to get where you're at, and every single person you'll see throughout your day and throughout your week has hopes, needs, fears, dreams, objectives, impediments, constraints. They struggle with all the same things we do. They may differ in degree, but we all have those things. And at that level, we're the same. If we were to take it into a work context, and I were to ask everyone to raise their hand if they feel like they have things at work they feel they need to accomplish, again, every hand goes up. So what does that mean for us relative to this inward mindset? Well, look, when I'm inward, I ignore that fundamental truth about you, about the people that I interact with. Your needs, objectives, challenges, all those things that are very, very real to you, they're not real to me. They're practically non-existent. So I'm operating in a virtual reality in which you are more like a two-dimensional representation of a person. I'm seeing myself, experiencing myself as moving through my environment as a full person surrounded by people who are less than, less important, perhaps. I diminish their reality, so to speak. And so I've boxed myself off from you and who you are. And all of my focus is on me, the things that I need to accomplish, the things that I need to do, to the exclusion of everything else that may be happening with you. So I become so self-absorbed that you actually change in terms of how I'm perceiving you. You don't change in reality, not objectively, but subjectively, the way that I experience you, you do change. In a superficial way, you're much less like a person and more like a thing, more like an object. So you can think about objects in your environment, right? They're inanimate. They're inanimate. They don't, they don't act on their own. They don't have choice or agency. We have to act on them to bring them into existence. That's the characteristic of an object, and that's kind of how I begin to see people when I box myself off from their reality as a consequence of my self-absorption. Again, we use the term inward mindset to capture that idea. And so, look, I will tell you, when I went into that SWAT team, I was given an edict by the deputy chief. She told me, Chip, your mission is to go into this team and to turn it around. We need to improve this team's culture. We need less complaints. We need less lawsuits. We need less drama, because the impact of policing is no longer localized in a neighborhood. What happens in New York is news in LA. What happens here in Kansas City is going to be news around the world. This team is representing our brand in a very unfavorable way. And I need you to go in there and I need you to turn this thing around. So that was the stated mission. But I had a super secret mission. And my super secret mission was to look good to the colonel. So think about that. I can't focus on myself and the mission at the same time. She wanted me to help the team turn around. What I wanted to do was impress her. So going into that environment, I'm seeing all of these people on the SWAT team not as full people that have those constraints and impediments and goals and challenges and needs. I'm seeing them more like you might see an object in a superficial way, certainly in a practical way. So particularly for me, the way that I saw most of them was as a means to an end. Meaning that if I could get them to do the things I needed them to do, if I could get them to emulate the behaviors I needed them to emulate, and I could get the results that I wanted, meaning looking good to the boss, showing that I could make some progress here in this challenging situation, they were like pieces on a chessboard that I could manipulate toward my objective. They weren't fully real to me. They were a means to an end. They were like vehicles that I could use to get what I wanted. In this case, what I wanted was to look good. So imagine what that might feel like. Leaders coming in, I may be saying the right things. I might be using all the right words. I might be engaging in some helpful behavioral practices I could mimic that I could learn out of leadership books. But my fundamental way of being with you as a teammate is I'm only seeing you in terms of your utility. I've reduced you to a function. You begin and end with what you can do to me, what you bring to the table. So that's one way that I showed up with them. Another way was, look, if they disagreed with me or they didn't cooperate or they violated the rules or they didn't support the change management efforts I was making, then they were simply in my way. These were people that were obstructing me in my goal to look good to the colonel. And what do we do with obstacles, right? We overcome them, we avoid them, we might destroy them, metaphorically. Think about how we contend with obstacles in our path. What would it feel like then to be treated or seen that way as somebody who didn't count fully, but was just there in terms of being viewed in terms of being an obstruction, right? So I can see you as being helpful to me. You're a vehicle. I can see you as being in my way. You're an obstacle. And if you can't help me and you can't hurt me, then you don't matter to me. You're simply an irrelevancy. And as you think about your organization, you might take some time to do this. Look around your organization today and see if there are people in that organization that might feel like they're irrelevant, that might feel unseen, that might feel like they don't count, that they can't bring their full self to the table to make a meaningful contribution. Who are those people? Who might those people be that might feel that way? So that's my world. When I'm inward, it alters my reality. It corrupts my entire operating environment. I'm seeing everything in a distorted way. And why? Well, because I have to feel right about seeing people this way. I have to feel right about prioritizing my needs to the exclusion of everyone else's. So this is what it means essentially to be inward. And why am I against that? Well, beyond the reasons, like some of you are thinking, well, look, who would want to be that way? Which is a valid question, and often I don't even know that it's a conscious choice for some of us. When we get so self-focused, we can't see clearly. and we can't fully honor the person of the people around us. So, look, it's just practically ineffective. People don't want to work with people who don't see them. What I learned in those neighborhoods, those challenging neighborhoods we worked in, is the complaints weren't being driven so much by what I was doing or what the team was doing. They were being driven by how people felt seen by us in what we were doing. And so this is a fundamental issue of how I'm seeing people, not what I'm doing. So what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is to simply yield to the truth about other people, to acknowledge their humanity, to actually see that at a fundamental level, they count the same as I count, to acknowledge that they have those things that I have. They have objectives and needs and so forth and so on. They matter like I matter at that level. And because they matter like I matter at that level, they're people. And because they're people, I'm interested and curious about their objectives and needs, challenges, constraints, and so forth. So then what do I do? Coming back to that level of behavior. With this mindset, I operate completely differently. Rather than being completely self-absorbed, I focus on doing the things I need to do. I still have things I need to do. They're still important. Those things haven't gone away. But I think about doing them in a way that actually enables or empowers other people to accomplish their work and address their needs with less friction. So this is like I'm moving through the medium of leadership, but I'm doing it with less drag, because it's like sanding with the grain in wood shop, right? Or flowing downstream with the current. I'm simply alive and curious about other people, what they have to accomplish, and I make modifications in my work so as to account for the impact I have on their ability to accomplish what they need to do. So it's not like from an inward mindset, I'm focused on my results, the things that I need to do, and everything that you need to do or the other people that I'm impacting need to do. Well, that stuff lives outside of my ability to perceive it. It lives outside of a metaphorical box, if you will. I box myself in, and all of your needs and concerns and desires, so forth and so on, live outside of that. I don't have access to them at all. That's the virtual reality I've created. It only exists in my own head. But I make decisions in that virtual reality from that inward mindset. From an outward mindset, I'm focused on our results. My stuff, the things I need to do are still incredibly important, but I do them in a way that, again, takes into account the impact I have on you, the other teammates, and their ability to accomplish their mission, their objectives. So you see that contrast there between inward and outward. So how does this relate to conflict? Well, let's think about this. If I am showing up this way with you, if I am resisting your humanity, I'm making an accusation of you that you're not worthy. That's one way that I can show up with this inward mindset, that I can look down on you. That's one way I can do that. That's me blaming you, essentially. And what does that invite in other people? Think about it. What does it invite in you when people blame you? Well, it invites the same thing. When I'm accusing someone, it invites them to be defensive. And when they're defensive, it invites them to wall off, become self-concerned, head down, worried about protecting themselves from my accusations. And so what do they see in return when they look at me? Is just an object. It's just an object. And so I'm inviting the very thing in this other person that I really, if you'd ask me what I wanted, it's what I really want to avoid. So let's unpack this dynamic. Let's suppose that I am inward toward a coworker. Let's call him Aaron. So Aaron's a teammate. He's on the team. And my goal, remember, is to look good to the boss. That's my goal. I see Aaron as a means to an end. If he does what he's supposed to do, he's a vehicle. And if he doesn't do what he's supposed to do, he's an obstacle. And so that's how I'm perceiving Aaron. And I'm just basically seeing him, again, as less than a person. So in seeing him that way, let's say I'm having a big meeting with a bunch of different teams from other agencies, other organizations. And Aaron, he comes in 10 minutes late. And everybody sees this. Now, one of the characteristics of being inward is I am not curious. It never crosses my mind to wonder why he might be late. I only think about it in terms of how it's impacting my self-image. And my particular self-image in this context is the leader who's in charge, who's running things, who's got everything on lockdown. And here comes Aaron strolling in late. And what do I do? What do I do from an inward mindset? Well, I blame him. I blame him. I blame him for what? Well, I blame him for my reaction to his lateness. I blame him for my incurious attitude. He's to blame. He's the reason I'm feeling the redness in my neck. He's the reason that I'm feeling this disturbance. He's the really reason I'm embarrassed. And I can blame him in a couple of different ways, right? I can blame him silently. I can look at my watch and shake my head and give him a disapproving nod, or, I could just, bare my teeth and kind of push down all those emotions. I'll be simmering on the inside, but not necessarily verbal. Or, as was my practice, I would just get loud. I just go right to violence. So I'm going to blow up and I'm going to yell at Aaron in front of everybody for walking in late. That's certainly one way to address it. So think about that. When I'm doing that, when I am yelling at Aaron, mistreating him in that way, calling him out in front of everyone, putting the spotlight on him and diminishing him without any regard to what he might be dealing with, the invitation for him, right, is to become defensive himself and to see me not as a boss who deserves respect, not as a boss who deserves employees who show up on time, but as a maniac who's mistreating and abusing him. And what that does is gives him excuse to evade or avoid any responsibility he might otherwise feel for being on time or for meeting other obligations. He can then blame me for his failure to do the things that he should be doing. To whatever extent he's actually responsible, there isn't actually a reason for him to have been late that is valid. So what happens? Well, I objectify him. I blame him. Who does he think the problem is when I blame him? He thinks the problem's me. So he objectifies me and he blames me. And his blame invites more objectification from me, and around we go. And this cycle just continues. And the walls of that metaphorical box that we're now in, remember, we're walled off from the rest of the world. We're focused so intently on destructively cooperating to undermine results that all the other stuff in our environment fades away. All the other people fade away and until we need them. So this dynamic, Arbinger calls collusion, and we use that term ironically. In an actual collusion, in a legal collusion, let's say, generally the people involved know exactly what's happening. They've conspired to undermine an effort or to defraud something. They've entered into a verbal agreement often to collude together, to act in a nefarious way. In this particular scenario, there isn't any agreement, but it appears there is. So we define a collusion as a conflict between people. It's a conflict in which the people involved are actually inviting the thing that they say they don't want. They're inviting the thing they're complaining about. That's a collusion. I'm saying I want Aaron to be a better employee, a more responsible teammate, but I'm behaving in a way that almost ensures I get the exact opposite. And it's driven by my need to be justified, to feel right about violating my sense of Aaron's personhood. What I need in that moment is to feel right about doing wrong, to feel right about selling out as a leader, not doing my job, to inquire, to be curious, to develop, to help him grow, to provide an opportunity to improve. And so round and round we go. And then what do we do? Of course, now we're interested in getting as much justification as we can. We really need to buttress our position here because it is weak, because it's made, again, in a virtual reality. So we're going to think about involving other people. I've got people that I can get onto Team Chip. I'm going to go talk to them about Aaron and how irresponsible he is and how he can't be counted on to do the right thing. And he, of course, Aaron, has people he can talk to get onto Team Aaron. He'll bring them on. He'll talk to them about how he's working for a maniac who doesn't care about him as a person, who isn't even curious about the things he might be struggling with. And so now it's no longer Chip and Aaron. We've invited in all of these other people. And this collusion, it grows and it metastasizes in the organization. And it ends up being something that runs out of control. And so look, I will invite you to think about this dynamic. And you may call it something different, but you've seen it, you've noticed it. And we're bringing this to the surface here. We're wrapping a language around this phenomenon so we can understand it and talk about it better. This collusion, this way of cooperating destructively with one another, this is either the cause of or exacerbates every person problem you have in your organizations, every one of them. This is happening to one degree or another. And this is what undermines organizations. This is what destroys them from the inside out. So I want to kind of walk you through, and I'm going to do this kind of quickly given our time, but I want to walk you through a little tool, and it's under the docs. It's under the docs tab here in the webinar platform. But if you just have a piece of paper, you can just pull out and draw a huge plus sign on it, dividing that paper into 4 quadrants. And I'm going to walk you through it. Again, I'm going to push you a little faster than I normally would, given our time constraints, but I'm going to walk you through a framework that Arbinger developed to help us diagnose this dynamic. So you've got your paper, you've divided into 4 quadrants. So I want you to relax for a second. I want you to simply think about and picture in your mind somebody you're finding frustrating, somebody who frustrates you, someone you find aggravating or off-putting in some way, someone that you feel like is making your life more difficult. Think about that person, picture that person, and I want you to keep them in mind as we walk through this diagram. And I want you to start down in quadrant 1. So you notice I've numbered these quadrants clockwise. Starting in the bottom right quadrant, we've got quadrant 1, 2, upper left is 3, and then the upper right is 4. We're going to start down that lower right quadrant of your plus sign, and we're going to simply bullet point in that quadrant the things this person does that trigger you. And it could be anything from rolling their eyes at meetings to gossiping to showing up late to engaging in misconduct to not finishing their work to on and on and on. But whatever it is for you, I want you to just take a minute and bullet point out in quadrant 1 the things that that person does that you find triggering when you're self-focused. Okay, again, I'm going to push you, but it doesn't normally take that much time once we think of that person for us to start cataloging the things that they do that we find irritating or provoking. So now we're going to move over to quadrant 2. So we're going to go 1 quadrant at a time. Don't get ahead of me. In quadrant 2, what I want you to do is I want you to think about when you're inward, when you're defensive around what this person's doing, how do you see them and what they are doing? How would you describe them and what they are doing to a third party? What adjectives would you use to describe them and their behavior? I want you to capture those things in quadrant 2. Again, you can just bullet point them out or write them in a narrative, however you best would want to communicate that on paper. Okay, we're going to move to quadrant 3. And what I'm looking for here is as much self-honesty as you can tolerate, as much truth as you can bear here. I just want you to be objectively honest about your behaviors. So what I'm interested in capturing in quadrant 3 is what do you do in response to what they do and how you see what they do. They're doing whatever it is that they're doing. So in my case, it was Aaron showing up late. How did I interpret that? Well, he's insubordinate. He certainly doesn't care about the team. He's selfish. He's irresponsible. He's not accountable. That's how I saw him. Well, seeing him in that way, how did I respond to him? What did I do? I yelled at him. I embarrassed him. I might write him up. I might put him in a tactical timeout, right? My point is that that's the things that I did. And what I want you to cue you in on here is, well, let me just let you do that before I go any further. Write down the things that you do in response to how you're seeing that person and what they're doing. Okay. So I want to point something out to you here that I find fascinating. When I am inward, I am certain that what I am doing is in response to what they are doing. Matter of fact, often when I'm inward, that inwardness blinds me to the plethora of options that are out there to inform my response. Um, I feel like when I'm inward, I'm responding in the only way any reasonable person could. But how I'm responding is always a product of how I'm interpreting what they're doing, not what they're doing. I'm going to say that again. It's not what they're doing I'm responding to, it's my judgment of what they are doing. And when I am boxed off from their reality, my judgment is always self serving. My judgment is always going to be colored by the fact that I need to see them and what they're doing as wrongly as I can to justify my hardness toward them, to justify my bad feelings. Whether those feelings are insecurity or anger, I need to be able to effectively blame them. So I interpret what they're doing in a way that best benefits me. And what I do then flows from how I see. That's where I'm accountable in this entire situation. So in quadrant 4, this is what I want you to do. And this is a kind of a fun exercise. I want you to imagine you are in the position of the other person, this other person in your story. And that may seem hard to do, but here's how I'm going to help you get there. I want you to ignore what you wrote in quadrants 1 and 2. You have no access to that information. You don't know anything about what's in quadrants 1 or 2. The only thing acting in the role of this other person that you know is what's happening in quadrant 3. The only thing that you know is what you're seeing, how you're being treated. And I want you to fill out quadrant 4 by simply answering this question. If you were inward and someone was treating you in the ways that is listed in quadrant 3, how would you see that person and what they are doing? So again, if you were inward, you were self-focused, you were defensive, you were self-concerned, and someone were doing the things in quadrant 3 to you in your direction, how would you see that person? And populate your answer there and bullet point if you need to in quadrant 4. Okay, so then we ask this question. Does quadrant 4 likely lead to more or less of quadrant 1? Does what they are seeing in quadrant 4 likely lead to more or less of the behavior we've captured in quadrant 1? And I think most of you will probably be noticing that it likely leads to more. this is an indication that the way that we are behaving toward this person is inviting them to see us in a way that leads to them engaging in more, not less, of the thing that we say we want them not to do. We're inviting the very thing in which we were complaining about, and that is the dynamic that we call collusion. So that gives you something to ponder. This is what feeds unhealthy conflict. I have to make the point here that conflict can be healthy. Matter of fact, some conflict is good. That's that resistance, that adversity. We can grow from that. We can grow in all kinds of helpful ways. As a matter of fact, I don't know any other way to grow other than testing your current hypotheses, theories, frameworks, beliefs, right? Mode of operating. You've got to test those. Sometimes those things become irrelevant and they need to be reshaped and reformed. And the way we do that is by having challenging individuals in our life to invite us to see things differently. There's healthy conflict. This is unhealthy conflict because it's not designed on helping things improve and helping us achieve our mission in a better way. It's not designed in being cooperative. It's designed to help us excuse ourselves from our responsibility to be a good teammate, from our responsibility to be a good leader. And that's why this is so unhealthy and destructive. So thinking about conflict, there's 4 levels of conflict work generally. And the first level, where we often see people operating, is what we call conflict management. What happens in conflict management? Well, we simply come in. Let's say that I'm a leader. I've got a couple teammates that are in conflict. I'll find some way, usually environmentally, to address this. I might move them, relocate them to separate teams, shuffle them around, insert an intermediary, ensure that they don't have direct contact. And in that way, I'm managing it. Like, it often manifests like, well, it looks like Jim and Janie, they just can't work together. They just can't work well together. So we give them some other responsibilities and we shuffle them around. Now you can see the issue here. Well, there's a multitude of issues here, but the 2 primary issues are, if I'm constantly moving people around when they get into conflict, I mean, that's untenable, but also they take whatever attitude they had in that conflict with them into those new contexts, those new relationships. That's going to happen almost assuredly. So what's the next level? Well, the next level is conflict resolution. We're going to come in and we're going to resolve the current proximate issue between those 2 people. This often involves some type of maybe a move toward compromise where both parties give a little. And sometimes there's some resentment that's underlying there on the backside of that, because maybe I feel like my idea, obviously I was advocating for it. It was the right thing. And now we're doing less than the best thing. And the other person might feel that way. And, but at the level of behavior, on the surface level, we shake hands, we move on, but we don't really move on in a fundamental way. Again, we keep and maintain those resistant attitudes. And then the next time some stressful situation pops up, we're right back in the box toward each other. We're inward again. So these solutions, again, purely behavioral. If we want more, we got to go deeper. We got to go deeper if we want more. And so the real work occurs when we can transform the conflict. We want to completely change the texture of the conflict. What does it mean to change the texture of a conflict, to transform it? It means that one of those parties takes the responsibility that is theirs to take. I'm going to dig a little deeper into this with a metaphor, but it just simply means that one of the people involved in the conflict quits blaming the other. And again, simple, profound, not always easy. There are a lot of emotions driving our position when we're inward. And remember, while our worldview, our view of ourself and our view of the other person is corrupted, our emotions are very real. The emotions, you're actually feeling angry. You're actually feeling accused. Emotions, just like thoughts and words, can lie to us. But it's so hard to see that when it's happening because we're experiencing it, even physiologically responding to those emotional triggers, right? But what happens in conflict transformation is we're creating a different invitation. By not blaming this person, we're inviting them not to blame us back. And that's what we call reconciliation. That's actually what we're aiming at in terms of how to resolve conflict. But the most important move in that whole dynamic is that first move, that first person that decides, you know what, I'm not going to play the blame game anymore. I'm not going to be accusatory. I'm not going to give them excuse for resisting me. I'm simply going to see them. I'm simply going to see them as a person and honor their personhood and just again turn outward. That's the move. The turn outward is the move by that first person that changes the whole dynamic. I'll use a metaphor just to illustrate this. Imagine two chairs back to back. You can imagine people sitting in them. This is a good graphic illustration of a collusion in the sense that those people in those chairs can't really see each other. And they don't see the same world either. They have a completely different worldview. They can't really communicate effectively. So you can think about two chairs back to back as a metaphor for collusion. If that's true, what needs to happen for the collusion to end? Well, the obvious answer is they need to turn chairs toward one another so they can see one another, so they can communicate more effectively, so they can take into consideration the other's viewpoint. That's what needs to happen to end it. But what are the chances that both people are going to do that at the same time? What are the chances both people are going to wake up one morning and say, well, yeah, I really haven't been as patient as I should be. I really haven't been as curious as I should be. I think I might need to look at myself here. Look, the odds of that happening at the same time, I'd say are pretty slim. So what do we think the solution is when we're stuck? What do I think the solution is when I'm inward? I think the solution is for the other person to turn. Matter of fact, I'll say it all the time. What would make it better, Chip? What would make it better is if they would change. If they would do things differently, that would make it better. That would solve all the issues. I just need them to be different. If Aaron would just be more responsible, I wouldn't have to feel this way. And I wouldn't have to act this way toward him and punish him if he would just be more responsible. I believe that in my mind. I say that's what I want, but it's not what I want. What I want is to be justified for blaming him. And that shows up, by the way, in my behavior when he tries to change. When I'm still stuck and he tries to change, a lot of times it gets better or it gets worse before it gets better. What do I say? It's too little, too late. He doesn't really mean it. He was in some leadership webinar and he learned a new tactic. He's just finding a different way to blame me or take the high road. I've got all of these desires, all this motivation to pull him back in because I need him there. If I'm going to continue to blame him, I need to provoke him to do things that make him blameworthy. So when I'm stuck, I can't get unstuck. Anything I can think of to get unstuck from being stuck just keeps me more stuck. When I'm inward, all the thoughts I have are inward thoughts until I make that fundamental move to actually yield to the truth about Aaron, to yield to the truth about whoever I'm in conflict with. I can't ever really get out of this. So that's why the most important move is that first move. Turning my chair with no expectations for what that other person will do for me. Turning my chair because it's the right thing to do for them as a person, not because of what I want them to do for me. That is the fundamental change that changes everything because I give them a completely different person to respond to. And it changes the whole dynamic. I remove from them much of their justification for seeing me in the way they're seeing me. And for blaming me in the way they're blaming me. I give them a completely different person to respond to, and it changes the entire dynamic. I can't fix every problem that I find myself enmeshed in on my own, but I can end any collusion that I'm in at any time. And collusion is only exacerbating whatever problem we're actually trying to confront or pretending to try to confront when we're self-focused. It takes two people to collude. I can end a collusion at any time by simply stopping the blame. Any number multiplied by 0 is 0. But why does this feel risky to people? When you make the suggestion to people, a lot of times they'll say, well, look, I'll feel exposed. I'll feel, it's too much. Like if I see them as a person, they'll take advantage of me. They'll run over me. I have to give up my desires, my needs. I have to give the things that I want to accomplish. And it feels like a step too far. Like when we're blaming and accusing and defensive, we feel like this person really is a maniac. And but here's the thing. They might be. There are toxic people in the world. And I need to see that too. But that requires me taking off of those goggles of the inward mindset that are obscuring my true clear-eyed view of them. If I'm seeing them in a corrupted way, I won't even understand their toxicity enough to make helpful modifications to our relationship, enough to draw healthy boundaries in our relationship. When I turn, I'm actually more safe because I can see them for what they are. And when I'm no longer giving them an excuse for bad behavior and they're still behaving badly, then they're free to experience the natural consequences of their behavior, of their decision. That's the only way they can truly be free. And so, look, I get it. I understand it completely of why that might feel risky. I have rather personal story I'll share with you as an example of this dynamic and how insidious it is. When I was a kid, I was homeless. I was abused, slept in cars, missions, fostered occasionally. My dad was a clinical psychopath and a career criminal. He was a physically abusive man. And, some of you listening out here statistically have had those experiences. There's no doubt in my mind. And you know what that's like. And for those of you that don't, you can imagine as a young child, it affects you. It impacts you. It scars you a bit. And I was certainly scarred. And I became a very angry young man. And I remember I was about 11. My uncle found us in Homestead, Florida, and we were in a little bungalow at the time where we were staying. My dad had acquired this little bungalow, and my uncle shows up, and he's a law enforcement officer in Missouri. He walks in, and he's got a fistful of 50-gallon trash bags. And he looks at my father and he says, "Vern," that's what we called the old man, was Vern. He says, "Vern, I'm here to get Mary and the kids. If you get up from that table, it'll be the last thing you ever do." And he hands the trash bags out to me and my brothers and sisters. And we start collecting up what little clothes and toys that we had. And he loads us up in the back of a big Cadillac and drives us to the middle of Missouri. And I remember as I'm walking out the door, I'm 11 years old. I look at my father, I look at Vern, and I said, "Vern, if I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you." And I didn't mean it figuratively. And so off we go to Missouri, and we get there and we're poor, but we have a place to live and we're safe. And my mom gets on assistance, and I work in a farm, and I'm hauling hay for a nickel a bale and making $1.75 an hour doing labor. And, things are like, we're safe. We're safe. Like the storm has calmed for the first time in my life. I feel, like I can live, but I can't. And I'm getting in trouble at school. I'm getting into fights. I'm getting detention. And every time that happened, I would curse Vern. I would say, "Look at what this man has done to me and how he's ruined my life." You can't come back from the things that he did. I can't be expected to be adjusted to this way of living after what I've gone through. I was arrested twice before I was 16 for violence. And it was bad. And every time, man, I would curse him. I hated him so bad, and I just wanted him dead. And I just remembered if he was just not around, I knew he was out there somewhere, living, and I'm here struggling and suffering as a consequence of what he's done to me. And so I just, was so bitter. And I grew up, and I learned to domesticate my anger, to push it down. Instead of blowing up, I would just simmer under the surface. And that, as I became a police officer and I got married and I had children, that was always happening under the surface. And I was failing in my marriage, I was failing as a father, and I was failing as a leader at work. But it was okay in a sense because I always had Vern to blame. How could anybody that came from a situation like what I came from do any better? And so I'm in the SWAT team. My mom calls me up and says, "Hey, Vern, hey, Vern is coming to town. Your father, he's coming to town. You got a brother you don't know. He's bringing him to town. He's got terminal cancer, and he wants to get some closure with you kids before he dies." Now, I'm a grown person now. I'm no longer a fragile kid. I'm a very formidable man. But I tell my mom, I said, "Listen, Mom, I'm not interested in anything that he has to say. As far as I'm concerned, the world's going to be that much lighter without him. And I would just, I'll pass." And my mom, I love my mom. She took a ton of beatings for me and suffered from bipolar schizophrenia her whole life. And she just begs me, Chipper, please come see this man, see your father. And so I acquiesced. I went over, and he's at my brother's house. He's laying in a bed in the back bedroom. And I go in there, and he's laying there, and he's no longer this big, scary person. Cancer has eaten him to the bone. He is a fragile shell of a person laid in this bed. And he's looking at me with these eyes, I've just never seen anything like it. And he's nothing like I remembered. And he just begs me to forgive him. And I remember looking at him, and I remember thinking, that is the last thing that's going to happen here. I wanted him to suffer like I'd been suffering. And I simply said to him, the last words he ever heard, why don't you get to dying so I can get to living? And he died. And I walked out of the room feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulder, like I could finally live. But I couldn't. I kept struggling in all my relationships, and I always blamed him. I continued to collude with him to undermine my effectiveness, but I colluded with his ghost. This man wasn't even alive anymore. And I was still keeping this alive, this collusion with my bitter feelings toward him, full of blame and resentment. And it wasn't until several years later, I had encountered Arbinger's work, but like many people that had, I was struggling, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's a journey. It's a practice. You don't ever really master being outward by any means. But there was one day I was sitting at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and I was in the back of a facilitation. An Arbinger facilitator was there. I was auditing the facilitation, and something came over me. I can't really explain it. I've been doing some reading that corresponded with what was happening in the facilitation. Something the facilitator said triggered some self-honesty, and I just all of a sudden had this sense of what I needed to do. And so I got up at lunch, and my father is buried at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And I found his grave. And I went up to his grave, and I simply turned my chair. I simply just yielded to the humanity of this person's memory. And I simply forgave him. I said, Dad, I called him Dad. I said, Dad, I'm here to give you what I withheld from you all those years ago. I'm here to forgive you. Dragging this stuff around has not been helping me. It's been making my life much worse and much more difficult. And so I'm here to give you that forgiveness. But I said, I also need you to forgive me. I need to ask for your forgiveness, Dad. Because you're responsible for what you did to me, but I'm responsible for what I did to you. And what I did to you was blame you for every wrong thing I ever did long after you were out of my life. And that ain't on you. That's on me. I use you as an excuse, as a patsy for not being responsible. And I'm sorry. I apologize. Those things are mine to own. And I walked away from his grave. And people are always asking on this journey, what happened that just totally changed your mind? And it was never ever one thing, right? There's always these different legs of the journey. You experience different things, and that kind of help you along the way and nudge you in the right direction. This moment, I felt a sense of freedom. I regained something of my humanity that I have not lost since. It changed my entire life. It changed my entire world in a profound way, because it showed me the power of taking personal responsibility. It showed me the power of being accountable, not for what is done to me. I'm not to blame for anything my father or anyone's ever done to abuse me, but I am 100% responsible for what I make of what they did. I'm 100% responsible for how I respond to what they did. The choices I make in the wake of that abuse, that mistreatment, that neglect, those are all mine to make. And look, I'm not giving you a prescription for dealing with the struggles in your life. I'm telling you that this was my way out of a perpetual way of being that was undermining my effectiveness in all my relationships. A special kind of collusion. I'll call that a primary collusion. All the other collusions I engaged in with all the other people that I interacted with personally and professionally, they were all spawned from that primary collusion. They were just satellites. And I would whack the heads off dandelions by trying to resolve some of those other satellite collusions. But at the end of the day, the root, right, was still there. That collusion with my father. Until I resolved that, I was prone to collude with everybody that I met. It was characteristic of me. I was importing my way of being in that primary relationship into all those other relationships and infecting them. To the extent you have a primary collusion in your life, and sometimes these things go way back, it's going to limit your ability to see the truth about other people. That doesn't mean that resolving some of those satellite collusions can't give you the momentum you need to go back and address some of those more foundational collusions. So there's hope on both sides of this, right? But I wanted to share that with you because I know, look, as leaders, you're going to lead people all the time. They're going to be carrying things with them that you don't understand. They're going to be carrying things into these conflicts that you're not really aware of, and you may never be aware of it. But remaining open and curious and thoughtful around the fact that the observable problem might not be the problem. It might be a symptom of a deeper problem that can help you be more effective. It can help you see them and regard them as a full person, which will make any decision you make more impactful. And it will invite them to take responsibility. So look, I didn't tell that story to trigger anyone, and I know I did. Statistically, several of you are triggered by that story. I did it to share with you the power of taking personal responsibility. And that's what it means to turn my chair, is to take personal responsibility. It's not giving in or compromising my safety or sacrificing my needs. It's none of that. What it means to turn my chair is to just own my responsibility in the collusion. So I'm going to leave you here today with something to think about. One, what are the consequences of not turning your chair in the relationship you've been considering? And then what's holding you back? And what do you make possible if you decide to make this move, if you decide to turn your chair? Yeah, I feel like that's a good place to stop because I feel like I want to take some questions. So if that's okay, we've got 10 minutes left here. I will take some questions. Let me end this. Okay. I should be back here. Okay. Now I'm looking at the Q&A, it looks like. Head to the Q&A portion of the chat. That's where I'm heading. My question is, I'm not going to say your name. You're out there. But my question is, it went away. My question is how to forgive and also recognize that someone's involved. Yeah, look, a lot of people think forgiveness is letting people off the hook. They mistake the old French saying to forgive all is to understand all, to mean to forgive all is to excuse all. That's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is simply ceasing to blame, ceasing to accuse, ceasing to insist that they continue to pay for whatever it is that they did. People who mistreat you, people that do wrong, they're suffering, I promise you, in profound ways. And if the reality of what they did ever hits them, they're going to be very remorseful and very full of guilt. There's nothing that you and I blaming them can do to ever make them hurt more than they're going to end up hurting, right, in the aggregate. So all forgiveness is simply me owning whatever it is I can own. And it may mean, like it did with my father. People ask with my father, well, Chip, if your father were alive, would you have a relationship with him? No. I would have drawn a healthy boundary. We would have nothing to do with one another. I can't trust him. Some things you can't come back from. So in this case, forgiving a person might mean you forgive them, but you still might not have a relationship with them. You still might draw a boundary. Hell, you might have to terminate them if it's an employee situation. So I want to try to get a couple more questions in here. I hope that was helpful. Could you elaborate the difference between holding people accountable? I apologize, folks. Navigating technology is not my major. Policy states you need to show up for work. Yeah, great. Okay, that went away, but I think I understand what you're saying. What I advocate is not holding people accountable. That robs them of their agency. It steals away from them their ability to do their best, right? Seeing them as a person means honoring that they have a choice. What I advocate is developing, equipping, and preparing them to be accountable. We want them doing the right thing even when the boss isn't standing over their shoulder. We want to help build accountable people. And we have a system at Arbinger, a way of approaching that, from clarifying expectations to passing the accountability baton off to the employee. We've got a system, a way of approaching that. But there is accountability, but they have to experience the natural consequences of their failure to meet expectations, which are well established, not emotional judgment from me, not my attitude toward them being negative. That's not a natural consequence. That just helps them rationalize away their responsibility. So we want them to be accountable, not try to hold them accountable. Can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? Oh, that went away. The answer to that, by the way, is no. This is all proprietary IP. I apologize for that. How can we stay turned when they keep firing volleys? So what happens, Lisa, in that scenario is oftentimes when I give someone a different person to respond to, oftentimes they will change. When I remove the justification I'm giving them for blaming me, oftentimes they will stop blaming me. When I see them, they will be open to seeing me, but sometimes they won't. So one of three things generally happens. I turn, they turn. I turn, they don't turn immediately. They double down on their behavior. Why? Because they need me back in the box. They need me to be inward in order to keep blaming me. So they'll provoke me, right? But if I hold the line, if I continue to persist in seeing them as a person, they eventually turn. And the third thing that happens is I turn and they never turn. They're stuck so deep in that inward mindset, they just can't find their way out. In which case, even though they don't turn, I find it doesn't bother me as much. I see them more compassionately because I know what it's like to be stuck. So I don't feel the need to judge and blame them in return. And even if we have to sever that relationship, I care about them as an individual, and I care about them enough to let them experience the consequences of their decision, both positive and negative. So great question. How do you deal with the person, this is Brian, how do you deal with the person you're colluding with who doesn't want to turn their chair? Yeah, that's their choice. And I think the way that question is framed, Brian, is a problem if you think about it, right? How do you deal with the person you're colluding with? Yeah, people aren't projects. People aren't problems. We're not dealing or contending or confronting them. We're simply seeing them and yielding to their humanity and getting intensely curious about why it is they're doing what they're doing and how we might be provoking what they're doing and where we might be wrong. If I'm unwilling to question where I might be wrong, then my search for the truth is always insincere. I don't really want the truth. What I want is more excuse or justification. So their issues are their issues. I might have to make a decision for myself, for my mental health, for my emotional health, for the good of the company or the organization to sever that relationship. But I can do it with clean hands. I can do it seeing them as a person and not blaming them. I struggle with, Samantha, I struggle with holding my tongue when disrespected because I don't want others to think I condone insubordinate behavior. Any advice? Yeah. So look, Samantha, I don't normally give advice. It's not my bailiwick. I normally think people know what to do. They just need permission to do it. A lot of times we're obscured or clouded, but this is what I will say to you. You can express yourself principally without being disrespectful. You don't have to hold your tongue. You just have to think about what mindset's informing the words you're saying. One of the things that I did is I much like you, I struggled with a lot of vitriol when I would come at them, is I started training myself, one, to get curious about why it is they're behaving the way they're behaving. And then when I shared my feedback, I might contrast a little bit at the behavior level. I'm at peace. I'm seeing them as a person. I might say something like, listen, what I'm not trying to do is to say that you're not worthy or you're disrespectful or you're arrogant. That's not what I'm trying to do. What I am trying to do is point out that when you behave the way you're behaving right now, it makes it impossible for us to be able to accomplish our mission. So I'm most interested in how I can help you. And so that might be one little tiny bit of advice. Just again, thinking through, letting my mindset inform what I say. I don't find the leadership scripts to be all that helpful. I think if my heart is open, my mind is open toward this person, that I'm seeing them compassionately, I'm going to know what to say. As a matter of fact, even if I don't say it perfectly, they're going to get it. They're going to pick up what I'm putting down because it's sincere and it's authentic. Okay, answer that question. Oh, Travis, what was the timeline for your team dynamics to positively evolve? So that team did evolve. It evolved in an incredible way. As a matter of fact, their evolution is documented in 2 textbooks. Represents one of the highest return on investments of training dollars to results that's ever been recorded. I don't have time to share that whole story, but to answer your question, some changes happened immediately in the one-on-one interpersonal relationships in the team. I mean, within days, things were getting better and improving, but I really messed up the implementation. Like I approached implementing this work like you would implement any other course you've ever taken that deals with how to act or how to, as a leader. This isn't that, right? This is so the best advice I ever got from assistant team leader Andy Kyle. He came in my office, he closed the door, and he said, "Chip, look, I know what you're trying to do here, but you need to be about it instead of talking about it. You need to show the kind of respect and regard for these teammates that you want them to show to the community and the other people that we're operating with or impacting. So until you actually walk the talk, it's not going to matter." That's what made the dynamic change. And Travis, at a macro level, to start eliminating those complaints and the lawsuits and all of that, within the first 6 to 7 months, we started seeing dramatic changes statistically in the results we were getting. Okay. I feel like we answered all the questions. I went a little bit over. We're right at quitting time, maybe. Okay. All right. Listen, is this recorded for sharing? Did we record this? We absolutely recorded this for sharing. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Linda, Adam. Thank you. I really appreciate the gifts of your time. Gift of your time. It's your most valuable commodity, and I hope, despite me having to talk kind of fast, that this was beneficial to you. So thank you all. Really appreciate you from wherever you're coming to us from. We will see you all on the other side. We'll see you next time. Make it a great day.